So I just want to welcome everyone into this space today, and thank you for being here for this important and very sacred conversation we're going to engage in about how to speak and engage in the topic of racial justice with your faith community. We are members of the Arizona Faith Network, who are people of faith who come together to work for the common good. We engage throughout the state of Arizona in theological dialogue, interfaith education, relationship building, and social justice and advocacy work together. My name is Reverend Katie Sexton, and I'm so honored to serve as the Executive Director of the Arizona Faith Network. We have been around Arizona for a while. You may have known us before we were an interfaith organization as the Arizona Ecumenical Council, and then before that as the Arizona Council of Churches. And so we are proud to say we have a long history of working with many faith communities and are now expanding that to be more diverse throughout the state. I want to welcome all of our panelists today, who we will introduce as we go along, but I also want to encourage all of our attendees who are joining us through Zoom and through Facebook to lift up your questions throughout this time. You can lift up your questions in the chat and also in the Q&A section as well. And at the end of our time together, after our panelists have spoken, I will be lifting those questions up to them to address as well. At this time, we also want to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. If you will share your name, what faith community or tradition you're from, or community organization you're from, so we know that you're here today. And if you'll introduce yourself in the Facebook comment sections too, we are going to be lifting all those up as well. With that being said, I am turning over the mic to the Vice President of the Board of the Arizona Faith Network, Rabbi Bonnie Sharfman, who's also the Rabbi of Congregation Kalai here in the Valley, as well as many, many, many more titles of many community organizations she is a part of. Rabbi Bonnie.
Thank you, Reverend Sexton. So, friends, we're so delighted that you've chosen to spend the time with us here this morning. And I wanted to speak with you a little bit about the genesis of the initiative first. Like many of you, I was struggling with how to be a better ally to people of color, how to engage in the movement underway to recognize and respond to the pervasive racial injustice that predates the establishment of our country, and how to do so without cultural appropriation or claiming that I understand, even as I'm seeking to, and I'm sensitive to, and I don't really, as this hasn't been my journey. There's a meme circulating out there that hit a note with me and I shared with my own congregation. It says, white privilege doesn't mean your life hasn't been hard. It means your skin tone isn't one of the things that makes it harder. So with that in mind, and the biblical injunction not to stand idly by while your neighbor bleeds, I realized that Arizona Faith Network has an incredible capacity to live its mission in these times. And we created a design team to plan out what started as a racial justice Sabbath idea that was centered around the upcoming American Independence Day and creating a vision of a more just America that we all want to see. And with the efforts of our diverse team, we're kicking off something much broader and something much more meaningful, which is a 7-month-long initiative starting with the beginning of July and around the 4th of July through the end of February, because of February being Black History Month. And what this initiative about, it's about listening, it's about learning, it's about teaching to open minds and hearts. And I want to stress that we're conveners of this process, and it's ultimately up to each of you to interpret and to create program for your own congregants, as you know them best. We're here with you for resources and support in this journey together that I'll share with you towards the end of our time together this morning. So what we're asking of you as participants in this process, and hopefully you've signed the pledge, we're asking you to preach, teach, speak as is appropriate for your congregations. We're asking you to take the pledge. We're asking that you journey and learn together with us. And what we're asking of you is to share of yourselves. You know your people best, and we're here to provide those resources. So I'd like to now introduce who is on the design team. So all the presenters that you'll hear from this morning were essential parts of our design team. In addition to each of the presenters, I'd like to acknowledge Mufti Didmar Faja of the Islamic community, Paul Rockauer, the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, Reverend Eric Letterman of the Grand Canyon Presbytery and of University Presbyterian Church, Billy Fidlin, the President of the Arizona Faith Network, and Reverend Katie Sexton, our wonderful Executive Director. So again, what are we doing through this time? We're changing hearts and minds. We're building community and getting to know one another and getting to know your neighbor. So in addition to the opportunity on a Sabbath or an opportunity for worship with your congregation, we're also going to be having some additional elements to this initiative. One of them is going to be part of AFN's Know Your Neighbor, which is hopefully connecting your communities with other communities with whom you would normally not contact. And that means for exchanges, for now virtually, with adults and with youth, and also the possibility of pulpit exchanges or pulpit swaps, so that we could, via Zoom or other media, be visitors in each other's congregations and share messages to understand how deep this work is and how important it is to do this work together. And as we get to know each other, as you motivate your congregants to get to know your neighbors, we have confidence that we can create a significant impact in changing the minds and culture of our country for the better. So I'd like to now turn it back to Reverend Sexton.
Thank you, Rabbi Bonnie. We are so excited and glad that you are all here. We know that this time is a difficult time for so many in our communities, especially our communities of color. And so we are grateful for our panelists this morning and welcoming our first speaker today is Reverend Joan Crawford, who is a previous board member of the Arizona Faith Network and a deacon at Guardian Angels Ecumenical Catholic Community in Tempe. Reverend Crawford, the mic is yours. Hey, Joan, unmute yourself.
Thank you. All righty. I'm happy to be here today to share some of my thoughts and ideas. With the given uprising in our country, frequently people come to me and ask, what can I do? What should I do? Well, I'm going to give you some suggestions on things you can do. And first and foremost, pray. Pray. You know, one of the wonderful things about the civil rights movement from the 60s and 70s and beyond was that it was an interfaith movement, because people knew then and they know now that we are up against powers and principalities. We are up against, in my opinion, evil. And so we have to call upon God, we have to call upon the Holy Spirit, whatever your faith tradition is, to help us and lead us and guide us, not only collectively, but individually. What will be your role in the fight for justice, for racial justice? You have to be particular, you have to be precise. Where do you fit in? Well, that's a big question because there are so many, many needs. Next to praying, I would recommend that you read. Faith communities, a good place to start would be the letter from the Birmingham jail. Now, this letter was written by Dr. King when he was incarcerated after protesting in the city of Birmingham. What was heartbreaking about that is that the white clergy from the area wrote him a letter, and they said to him that they understood and they sympathized with the need for justice for Black Americans, but they didn't like the way he was going about it. And they felt as though he should take his time and give it a little more patient. So when he was in that jail, he wrote this letter. Now you could have your community read the letter, or you can actually go to a film that is produced by Ohio State University.
There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community.
Go back here just a minute so you can see that it begins by giving you the backdrop of what's happening in Birmingham, Alabama, and why Dr. King is there. And then it leads into the particular concerns that the white clergy had about his presence. Once he is placed in jail, he begins to write the letter. And members of the Ohio State University,
I want to try to answer your statements in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms.
In Ohio,
I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against.
So I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom far beyond my hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Many of the famous quotes that you have heard through the years attributed to Dr. King are actually taken from the letter from the Birmingham jail. So I encourage you to either read it or look at the video. The other book that I recommend highly is The Warmth of Other Suns. Now, you have probably noticed there is a ton of books on the market now related to African American history, culture, the African American experience, racism, anti-racism. I like to encourage people to start with The Warmth of Other Suns because it is written as a narrative. What Isabel Wilkerson does is she tells you the stories of 4 families that migrated, African American families that migrated from the South to the North during particular decades in the last century. So please, I know the book is thick, it's got about 500 pages, but I've been told by others who've read it that it is a page turner. And that will lead you to the next book that you want to read. Everyone should watch 13th. It is on Netflix. You can't get it anywhere else. They put it on Netflix. They wanted it to be free to everyone. This is the topic is mass incarceration, and they tell you how this started, why it started, and the implications that it has for the Black community. The other movie is I Am Not Your Negro. The script is based on the words of James Baldwin. And what the director, Raoul Peck, has done is he's meshed those words with visuals from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's an incredible film. And again, you can find it probably on Netflix or Prime. It's time for us to change our perspective, folks. And one of the things you can do is to introduce or emphasize certain ways of seeing and hearing the message. Most people know that in the Black church, many of us have exuberant choirs, and we've got call and response, and we got amen here and amen there. But do you know why? See, it's the why that's important. So talk to your communities about African American spirituality and Black theology. Expose your community to people of color that they've read about in the Bible. Now, it may come as a surprise to some folks, but a lot of those folks in the Bible were people of color. So expose your community. You know how much to give and how much to ease into it, but show them pictures of the saints and the prophets, perhaps Jesus himself as a person of color. This is one of my favorite books, Jesus and the Disinherited, written by Howard Thurman. It is said that Dr. King carried this book with him everywhere he went. And after I read it, I understood why. In fact, you can hear elements of Dr. King's speeches in this book. What Howard Thurman does is he gives us a portrait of Jesus as an oppressed person, an oppressed Jewish person who is under the thumb of the Roman authorities. And as such, his life does not matter. This book was written in the late 40s, but it is so relevant still today. His life does not matter. And so Jesus has to determine, how is he going to survive? And that is what Howard Thurman reveals in this wonderful theology of Jesus of Nazareth. All right, folks. Preach. Preach it, preach it, preach it. Make sure that your friends, whatever faith tradition, that you look at your sacred books and use those as the spiritual foundation to point out that racism is a sin. Use your sermons to talk about Black Lives Matter. You know, one of the favorite examples I have of this is that the parable of the Good Samaritan is really another way of saying Black Lives Matter. Because, you know, if we take out Samaritan, we don't have much implication worthwhile in that story. It's the fact that Samaritan was placed there that makes it significant. And certainly all lives matter. But in this juncture of our country, we need to say Black Lives Matter because of the implications. Otherwise, it has no weight. And finally, just like I said, one more, listen. That's actually what I want you to do, is listen. Please encourage your communities to listen, especially when Black people are talking. Do not dismiss or minimize what they are saying. Just listen. And just like I said, it's a time for us to begin to look at different visuals. It's important to, when you are playing spirituals or
I'm gonna do
or freedom songs, make sure you tell people
what the Spirit says.
the message in the music.
Do
those spirituals, those gospel songs, those freedom songs have significance to the Black church and to Black people at large. They're
what
just
the
not a feel-good
Spirit says.
song.
Do
They are used to uplift and to
if
strengthen.
the Spirit says
So,
pray.
I hope that you will be able to utilize some of these
Oh Lord, I'm gonna
and I am
pray.
open to talk with you further if you have any questions.
I'm
Amen.
gonna do what the Spirit says. Do.
Thank you so much, Reverend Joan. We are so grateful for your words. And we got a couple of questions from folks if your presentation will be available. And I just want to let everyone know that we will be sharing the toolkit, which includes Reverend Joan's presentation at the end of this presentation and event today. So stay tuned for that. Reverend Joan also serves on the Arizona Faith Network's Race and Economic Equity team. So if you are interested in joining us for that work, please let us know as well. Thank you, Joan. Our next speaker is the wonderful Reverend Gerald Richard, who's a member of many community organizations throughout Arizona and does great work on many levels. I would love to have you, Gerald, just introduce yourself a little bit more so folks know the multiple circles you are involved in, because there's so many of them, but he's also an important board member of the Arizona Faith Network. Gerald, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Reverend Katie, and Reverend Joan and Rabbi Bonnie, thank you so much for your kind words as well. When I look at this, I think to myself, first and foremost, that we are initiating something similar to what we do for lawyers, and that is a continuing legal education training, but this is a continual spiritual leadership training that we're doing right here, especially on this important area. My background, I'm originally from the south side of Chicago. Came to Arizona on a track scholarship. Just get through a whole lot of different things. What's so funny is it's interesting to be on this panel right now with Reverend Joan, because we grew up just doors down from each other, and her younger brother was my best friend growing up, and still is to this day. And for us now, and we went to a Catholic school, and for us now to be here representing a different faith than what we grew up in, shows how we've been able to grow. But this issue that we're dealing with right now is still so prevalent. And I want to also thank Reverend Joan for bringing in the Ohio Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. And I want to inform others out there that what's really important is that there's an Arizona State University Center for Race and Democracy, one which several years ago held a forum called What Is It Like Being White? And the place was packed. And when I looked up and I saw individuals from the Nation of Islam, I said, Minister Muhammad, I said, why are you here? He said, because I want to know what it's like. I really want to know. But it goes even further than that. Some of the questions that were raised that Katie had, I wanted to address those specifically. And the first question was, how do you answer someone who sends you pages of statistics that proves, in quotation marks, that the Black community has only themselves to blame? They are talking about Black on Black crime, not pursuing higher education, gang membership, single mother households, and other issues. And what I found was that a lot of this data that comes forward to you as far as issues along these lines really taps into some of the things that I've done 21 years with the police department, former gang prosecutor in the state of Arizona when we didn't, where it was still denying we had gangs, and ran for county attorney, worked as special policy advisor for Arizona Attorney General's office, attended just about every demonstration and rally while I was at the Phoenix Police Department for 21 years, my first being walking alongside skinheads to make sure that their First Amendment right was protected. And I had people who I knew from college stopping saying, what are you doing? I said, they're exercising their First Amendment right in a nonviolent way and getting their message across. And that's my job. We didn't have one incident nor one arrest. Over 150,000 people in April of 2006 walked through the streets of Phoenix. Not one incident, not one arrest. And a program that I belonged to, and I'll talk about a little bit later, was Anytown, where we brought kids together from all different backgrounds, all different religions, whether they were have or have-nots. And we allowed them to teach one another about biases and prejudices, about empowerment and leadership, about how to address issues. And then they would go back to their respective communities. And sometimes you wonder to yourself, does this ever sink in? And when we had the 6 that were killed up in the Midwest some years ago, there was a vigil that was held down in Phoenix. It was late one night and I was out there as normal, a lot of candlelight. And this woman walks up to me And she says, Gerald, we need camp. And at first I didn't know what she was talking about. But that I knew after she said it a second time exactly what she was saying. We need to come together and teach each other about one another. What makes us proud, those things that hurt, those things that can help us get through times like this. Because then we can respect somebody just by looking at them, as opposed to judging them based on the color of their skin, what neighborhood they came from, their clothes, and the like. But to answer these questions, having served in law enforcement and worked on the federal level on issues such as disproportionate minority confinement and contact, having worked on issues dealing with gangs and helping to establish prevention and intervention programs, as well as prosecuting them, having been to Ferguson after the Ferguson incident and doing an after-action assessment, one of the things that I learned that was consistent over and over and over and over and over again was that individuals don't take the time to read, like Reverend Joan was talking about. They see what they see on the media and they take that as gospel. And what I found back in the late 90s was when we were dealing with disproportionate minority confinement and contact, was that we called in media experts from around the nation up in Denver. And two of them came right here. One was Frank Camacho, the other was Linda Williams. And we asked the question, why is it we always see Black and Hispanic kids on TV when it comes to crimes, but we don't see any white kids? And they said, that is what we have been told from our supervisors. When you look at the episodes of Cops, they're always chasing down Black and Latinos. Let's bring it a little bit closer to home as far as what's happening. I watched on television as looters tore up Scottsdale. Every color was there. But when it came time to show those that were arrested, they only showed 3 individuals out of the 20, 2 African Americans and 1 Latino. Where were the whites that were arrested? So this image that we receive is one that we believe that it's them who are causing all the problems. When we take the time to look at the number of white single mothers on welfare, we would be shocked how it surpasses the number of women of color. The lack of individuals who are white who do not have insurance, that's not shared with you. However, whether you call it Obamacare or Affordable Care Act, you saw where individuals who did not like Obama jumped onto Affordable Care Act and told their Republican representatives, don't you dare take that away. The activities of skinheads and white supremacy groups are kept primarily by the Anti-Defamation League. And they are the ones who actually provide training nationwide, as well as over in the UK, to law enforcement about hate groups. It's not law enforcement training, it is a community-based organization that is doing the training. As I trained law enforcement officers in communities throughout the nation on a number of different cultural awareness issues, the number one answer by all groups of color was, how do I keep my child out of gangs? What was interesting, I would hear the same question whether it was in Guadalupe or whether it was 300 federal judges and attorneys. Because the true information about how gangs got started, how kids are drawn to gangs, how hybrid gangs are developed, how children and teens were found to glorify gangs in the media, created a generation of young adults that wore and continue to wear outfits that we identify with hip hop and rappers. And so consequently, this is something that is not untouchable. This is something that is part of our culture. The real issue is whether you accepted that which has been reported, or have you done the research to find out what, as Paul Harvey would say, is the rest of the story. This morning, I had a conversation with someone who asked me if I remember the Rodney King incident and how the officers were acquitted. And I asked her if she remembered the slaughter of Fred Hampton, who was a member of the Black Panther Party who was asleep, when on that fateful day in December 4th, 1969, while he slept, officers stormed his apartment and fired 3 volleys of a total of 99 bullets, killing him in his sleep. Recently, a young man who I've watched grow up, he said to me, did I know anything about the Black Panther Party and how it was not a subversive group as the FBI had portrayed them, but an organization that provided meals to children and food to families? Yes, I did know, because I lived in Chicago while they did that. He asked me if I had heard of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. And I let him know I don't have to look to the history books. because I was alive and well in Chicago when that happened. The second question was, I often get that slavery happened 200 years ago. Things are not good, but why do I need to feel guilty? Well, first, Reverend Joan and I, we grew up in Chicago, and there was a man who was the senior editor of Ebony magazine. His name was Lerone Bennett Jr. He wrote a book called Before the Mayflower. Folks, it's not 200 years ago, it's 400 years ago. Don't miss those other 2 centuries. For years, I have worked with Rory Gilbert. Rory's Jewish. Rory's been with the National Council for Christians and Jews. She has worked with me hand in hand as far as co-directing Anytown camps, along with Chief Jerry Williams as well. And what's interesting is during that time, and now we do it for Gatortown, which is out of Xavier College, we address the issues of privilege and the have and have-nots. Every camp I've ever attended, there have been tears, especially by our white children, because they feel this sense of guilt, because they realize the privileges that they have and they have not been aware of them. When you're poor and you don't know you're poor, you go on living life every day. Well, the same as for those that have privileges due to the color of their skin or their religion or the country in which they were raised, where freedoms they have and they can enjoy that others in other countries don't have. And so your sympathy can be overwhelming when you realize that your ancestors or people who looked like you were responsible for the atrocities that were inflicted on people who are not sitting next to you, or now sitting next to you, I should say, at the lunch table, or playing on the same team, or they work with you at the same job. And hopefully you are shaken to the core. It shows that you do care about your neighbor as you would yourself. However, what is critical at that point is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to take the time to read and learn? Are you going to attend cultural events and encourage your friends and family members to do the same? Are you going to visit churches, mosques, and synagogues and become culturally enriched? Our children and I use that term because of my age, and I use that term children because of my age. They're out there marching and protesting. They don't want to continue to live in a world where injustice is part of our culture. They're continuing to attend and talk to individuals day by day that realize that Blacks are not 3/5 of a person, as our Constitution once said. They are not crying that they are walking and talking to people who don't look like them. They are not crying. They are walking and talking with people who do not look like them. And as they walk and chant and sing, they are forming relationships that, believe it or not, years from now, they will be able to benefit from when they are working as adults in their respective careers. A friend of mine, I love this story, a sergeant who was a sergeant with the Phoenix Police Department while I was teaching cultural awareness classes back in 1991. He became just totally entrenched in this whole thing of learning about different cultures. I'll never forget, he and I, we happened to live in the same complex, and one night I saw him, he said, "Come, I want to show you something." He showed me all these Black history books. He said, did you know? Yes, I knew. But for some crazy reason, this cowboy who grew up on Buckeye Road started studying every culture he could. And I have a video, it's a VHS, where he's talking to a group of people from different groups about culture. He's not in uniform. And I ask over and over time when I show this, I say, what profession do you think this man is in? And they never say police officer. He later retired and worked for the feds in different departments. And the last department he worked in, he was liaison to Indonesia. Take the time to do your research. Third question, Black Lives Matter is a political organization out to separate the races and create havoc. Black Lives Matter is not a political organization. Do you see one presidential candidate on the Black Lives Matter political party? No. It's a community-based group that has brought attention to the incidents of injustice and racism, something that people do not want to see because it's ugly and very well may be part of their makeup. It puts the issue square in the face of what we as Americans profess should not exist in other countries, but failed to address for 4 centuries in our own. Look to what the organization is trying to accomplish. Not only that, look at all the individuals who are now wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirt, regardless of the color they are or how old they may be. They've taken the time to look into this. We need to do the same. It's not what others who are Black on Fox News might be telling you. It's what you've taken the time to do as far as the real research. 4th question was, how do we most effectively reach the people in the middle? Well, folks, it's not just the people in the middle. It's people at all the levels, on both ends as well. And we need to include that accurate, painful history, some of which Reverend Jones shared with you. We need to include the stories of the voices of our youth who have taken the time to march in the streets the same way we did in the 60s, where individuals who all were not Negro came and worked together and marched together and walked together for the purposes of civil rights. We need to include all the data that is available, not just what the media is showing us. And being African American, you would probably say, oh, well, you know something, Reverend? This is easy for you. No, it's painful for me. It's very painful for me. But I also realize that if I don't take the time to have the talk with our children in the church, that some child may miss that. I also remember that if I don't take the time in order to allow one of my young people every week to read historical highlights for that week, such as today, on this day, in 1917, actor, singer, and dancer Lena Horne was born. And you can take something like that and look up what Lena Horne has done, and then share that. We also, in this particular week, on Monday, was the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1864. Things like this you can share weekly. I do the same thing with holiday highlights. Believe it or not, one day this week, it's social media day. It's actually today. So don't get on your kids when they're playing video games. But it gives them a chance to balance it, to know what's going on in our world, but most importantly, to know what's going on in our American history that we were not taught. If you have, I want to thank all 94 people that came on in order to hear us today. I want to thank you for this time. I've waited for it all my life.
Thank you, Reverend Gerald. That was incredibly powerful. We are recording this presentation. There was so much content there, and so you will have a chance to go back and rewatch some of the presenters as you need to. Our next speaker is Mufti Didmar Faha, who is the Imam at the United Islamic Center of Arizona and a board member of the Arizona Faith Network. Mufti, we pass the mic to you.
Hello, everyone. I greet you with the greetings of peace. And I am so glad that Arizona Faith Network has put this program together today to inform many people here locally. And hopefully this video will reach out of Arizona as well and inform people about this important issue that is related not only to the Black people in America, but it relates to every single person who lives in this country and beyond the borders of this country as well. It's important for us religious leaders to speak against racism. And when we see injustice in society, speaking against injustice is a part of our traditions as well. And if we don't speak against injustice and racism, then we are ignoring a very essential part of our traditions. There is a cousin and at the same time a companion of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who lived 1400 years ago. And he mentioned a beautiful statement. He said, when the people of the truth remain quiet against injustice, then the oppressors suppose that they are on the truth. So, as I said, it is important for the people of faith to speak. But as we're speaking now, people who are hearing these messages, it's very important that they take it and they spread the words to the other people as well. Otherwise, this message, it's not going to work if people who are hearing it, they don't take it and spread it with the others. In these few minutes that I have, I can talk about my own experiences as an immigrant and as somebody who comes from a region where there was a lot of race issues and not necessarily black and whites, but other complex situation when it comes to race issues between, you know, Serbs and Albanians and ethnical cleansing and you name it. There were major problems, but I decide today to talk more from the tradition perspective, because unfortunately Islam is a religion that is being misportrayed out there. There's a lot of people who have wrong understanding about this faith, and Islam is also, and Muslims in particularly, they are being oppressed right and left at the same time. So it's very important for people to understand what Islam says about racial justice, and not what Didmar, me person, or another person says about it. So I want people to understand from our traditional perspective what the religion says and how our religion fights racism and discrimination. I want to bring to you first, I mean, the most important thing is for people to have an understanding why racism happens, or how did the racism started. And our religion, just as in Christianity, we believe that racism came from Satan. It was him who, said that I am better than you to Adam. And that was, as a matter of fact, the first sin that came. The Quran says, you have created him out of clay, while you created me out of fire. And the fire is better than the clay. So therefore, he rejected to obey the command of God to Adam. That's where it started. And Satan, since he was an open enemy to the human being, and it's going to remain as so to the end of the times, people, they always fall victims of such a crime, such a sin, that it was initially started at that time. Now, there is also another verse from the Quran that I want to bring to you, where Almighty God says, and among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. So again, Quran speaks explicitly about the diversity of the colors here. So when a person hears a verse, when a Muslim, for example, hears a verse, who believes in the verses of the Quran, hears a verse like this, he has no, or she has no ability to reject or to think otherwise. So the black person, the white person, the brown person, all of these different colors that are created out there, that it is a creation of God, and it is not you and me who has chosen to create people according to these colors. So he says, among his signs, meaning among the signs of God, is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Here it also calls us not to discriminate against people who speak a different language. It is sad to say, but the country, when I first came to America, instead of people embracing it and feeling good about another person speaking the English language, sometimes you would get looks. And the country where I come from, when I saw people speaking, trying to speak my language, I was really amazed, and I encouraged them to even do better. And it was really different. So I think that the bottom line of all of this one is pride. Just as Satan at the beginning, he was very proud of where he was created from the fire. That's how people as well, I believe a lot of them in the society too, they feel very proud of who they are. And because of their proudness, you know, they want to reject a segment in society. They want to reject many people as well, simply because of the background, as I said. So, and then it continues the verse by saying, verily, in that are signs of people of knowledge, meaning those who are thinking about the creation of the heavens and the earth, those who are also contemplating about the diversity of the languages and colors, those are people of knowledge, people who reflect on those signs. And I'm also going to mention to you another prophetic statement from our blessed and beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, and he mentioned these words in his final pilgrimage, where there are reported to be over 100,000 people gathered around him. And this was perhaps the largest gathering that happened. And he chose, it was a short speech, and he chose the most important messages to deliver on that day. He said, "O people, your Lord is one, and your father, Adam, is one." And recognize the way how he's speaking. He's not saying, "Oh, Muslims," "Oh, people," he says. Your Lord is one, and your father, Adam, is one. There is no favor of an Arab over a foreigner, nor a foreigner over an Arab, and neither white skin over black skin, nor black skin over white skin, except by righteousness. Have I not delivered this message? So he's asking this question to the people to make sure that every single person heard these words. Have I not delivered the message? As you can see here, he emphasized so much on making sure that people are not judging between each other based on their skins and based on their, because of their nationality, whether, being an Arab or a foreigner, or in this case, being an American and somebody who's an immigrant who originally was born somewhere else, or a refugee, whatever the case may be. So these are very strong messages here that are delivered 1400 years ago. And I also wanna stop at this last point today, that this statement of Prophet Muhammad mentions, but also there is also another verse in the Quran that talks about this righteousness. So pretty much we're talking about there is no distinguish between black and white, so we cannot defer people based on their colors and based on their languages and based on their nationalities. But it says, the Quran, very amazingly, it says, the best one of you is the one who is more righteous. O people, so the verse goes by, O people, we have created you from a single male and female, Adam and Eve, and we have placed you in large families, in tribes, and in nations, in order for you to recognize, in order for you to know each other. In other words, to learn from the experiences of one another. You are an American, there is a Japanese, there is an Albanian, there is a Mexican. All of this diversity is for us to get to know from the experiences of one another, this diversity that exists out there. Not so we can brag about our nationality and say we are the best, there is nobody like us. And by the way, every nation says the same thing too. Every nation says, those who are patriots, they say there's nobody like us. And I've seen this all over the places I traveled. So there is, in order for you to learn from the experience of one another. And then it says, and the best one of you is the one who is the most righteous. And this is so amazing because we don't know who's the most righteous person. We don't know. I mean, I can appear to you as I am very righteous, but you don't know what's in my heart. Or I can appear to you as I am less righteous, but you don't really know what's in my heart. Because it is only God, the one who knows the righteousness of the people. From the surface, we can't tell. And from the heart, we can see the heart. So in other words, it is me and my Lord who knows exactly what's in my heart, and he is the one to judge me for that righteousness. So in other words, we are left with no way of valuing somebody over another person. Why? Because we just can't measure righteousness. But we know that that's the element that can differ or that can make a difference between the people in society. According to our faith tradition, according to Islam, it is righteousness. So if we know these realities, then we should treat everybody the same. We should treat everybody with respect, with honor, with dignity. And the Quran says, we have honored the children of Adam. We have honored the children of Adam. We carried them on land and on sea, and we have bestowed upon them so many blessings, more than many other creatures that we have created. We are all blessed. And racial profiling, religious profiling, discrimination between black and white, discrimination between different levels in society, rich and poor, and all these things, they should be completely eliminated. I hope that this message reached out to the hearts, not just to the minds, but also to the hearts of those listeners. And I pray that they can be also delivered to the other people as well. Thank you very much for listening today, and may you have a blessed day.
Thank you, Mufti. We are so grateful for that message you gave us today. We do have one more speaker, and we know it's getting close to 1 p.m., but Rabbi Bonnie will be wrapping us up towards 1 p.m., and we'll be taking Q&As right after that. But please stay tuned for this next speaker, because he is so important in the community throughout Arizona. His name is Khalil Rishdan. He is another Arizona Faith Network board member, as well as the chair of our mission focus, which is criminal justice reform, which we have been working on with him. He also, in his paying job, is the community partnership coordinator for the ACLU of Arizona. Khalil, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'll get right into it, in the interest of time. We talk about racial justice and how we can bring solutions to the table. It has to start with communication. You have to lay a foundation to communicate with people about the issues that are still impacting the Black and brown community today. I talked to several people who say racism, up until the situation with Mr. Floyd, racism doesn't exist, it's a myth, so on. And even with one of the questions that Reverend Gerald answered, racism has never gone away. It's become more covert. You don't see the Klan marching through the streets now. You see people in three-piece suits or heads of certain systems where Black and brown communities have to tap into resources, but these become systems of oppressions that disconnect these communities. Reason why I bring that up is because now these communities become the most marginalized. And even within those communities, there's people who are more marginalized. So myself, I'm somebody who was directly impacted by the criminal justice system. And I served 15 and a half years on a wrongful conviction. So I vowed to come out and fight for those changes that need to happen to this system and move forward. But what I see at a lot of tables is the lack of representation from the most marginalized in the community. So I was very fortunate to work with Katie and AFN to create the Smart Justice Cafes, which was a platform that allowed us to bring faith leaders in and hear from directly impacted folks about their experiences within the criminal justice system and how they're still the most marginalized, even though they've fulfilled their obligations, completed their sentence, but they're not allowed to move on because there's barriers in housing, there's barriers for stable employment. I say this because This initiative is very, very important for everybody to engage in. However, when you sit down at your table, do a fair assessment and try to have the most marginalized at the table to be part of the decision-making process moving forward. Because it's hard to apply a solution to anything when you're on the outside looking in. So I'll stop there because in the interest of time, I want to turn it over to Rabbi Bonnie, but please sign up for the initiative, invite us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Friends, there was a great rabbi from the 1700s who said, if you have the ability to harm, you must also believe that you have the ability to heal. Right now, we're not talking about healing. We're not there yet. But we need to acknowledge that we have had and held in our hands the ability to harm, and we have done great harm. And in a sense of faith in the common good and in the future of this country and society that we know we can build together, we need to first acknowledge and build together. And then we will heal ourselves and each other, God willing. This is just the beginning, what we've heard today. And if you have been inspired and motivated, and if this program today has helped, let us know. We ask that you look at the chat again, and Reverend Katie has added the request again. Please take the pledge. And when you sign on to that pledge, that will allow us to get to your contact information as well. We have many things in our toolkit. They are being added to almost daily. Readings, sermons started, motivational messages, messaging suggestions. And we invite you as well to add your own. And Reverend Katie is here to help you with that as well. This is just the start. We are looking forward to providing more opportunities to connect. And as we said at the beginning again, to connect adults in your congregations, youth in your congregations who would normally not interact with one another, and also to facilitate pulpit exchanges on one-time or ongoing bases, and as well as other kinds of communication. Check our website. Let us know what it is that you've decided to do in your communities. We want to share these ideas with you. So I am going to just share one more thing, and I'm not going to do the little presentation I was going to do, but having been a former English and history teacher in high school, I have to go back to those roots, and I think of the power of language and metaphor. AFN has on its website a white paper. There's so many expressions I don't know the source of. I'm just going to call it a theological reflection, and we'll figure out what the heck that means later. But there's so many other sources of the language of race. Let's all become more aware of this language we use and how it affects people in different ways, and become more conscious of what comes out of our mouth, everything including minority, even that word. I learned today just one thing I'll tell you that's crazy. The origin expression, cat got your tongue, well, that's not usually something that happens with clergy. But that phrase was used by slave owners, I learned, after beating a slave so hard with the cat o' nine tails that he or she couldn't speak. I think some of this may start with language. To be continued, to be continued. So let's just use a very, very few minutes left in this time to answer any outstanding questions we have. Katie, do we have another one up on our screen? And we'll refer that probably to Gerald. Heads up there.
Just Gerald. We did have a couple questions throughout just about resources and recordings, and I just posted again our access to our toolkit. If you forget or lose that link, just go to arizonafaithnetwork.org, and it's one of our headers that you can easily navigate to on our website. Gerald, we did have one question that arose. Evangelical Christians is a phrase that gets highly utilized during political cycles, but that is often code for right-wing, white identity politics, and in some cases, fear-mongering. How can people of faith reclaim that term for the greater good? And I would just add to that too, how do you help folks in faith communities, because I got this question when I was serving as a pastor, how do you help folks realize that racial justice is not just a political thing, that we're talking about something that our faith calls us to?
Well, we're looking at racial justice and how That's not just not a political thing. I guess the most important part is to take a look at um, the positives that have been involved in, especially African Americans with American history. You know, when Crispus Attucks was the first one to die during the American Revolution, and he was African American. And then you look throughout to see all the individuals that provided inventions and ideas that have helped to change our country and our world. That is a positive way in order to look at it. And when you also tie in the evangelical Christians is interesting, because I've had individuals who have come to me when I was pastoring up in Flagstaff, and they said, if you turn this to an evangelical church, you know, you'll have more people coming. And so it's incumbent upon us in order to make the definitions and to make that clear when we are telling them who we are and who we're related to. So when they immediately say, well, that means that you're a part of, he says, no, this is what I'm a part of. And we can, and we've heard some outstanding speakers today as far as what they have been a part of. And I just want to say a closing, and that is, I sincerely hope that in the future we can hear Khalil's whole story. As one person put it, is a powerful story. And it's something that everyone should hear. It's important for us.
Yes, it absolutely is. And we have used Khalil and has lifted up his story in so many of our Smart Justice Cafes. Khalil, we would love to schedule some time where you can share that virtually, as it can get to so many more people. Thank you, Reverend Gerald. Are there any other questions today? We know we're a little bit over 1 p.m., but we will be doing these again, as Rabbi Bonnie said, that this is the beginning of these conversations. We will be engaging as you pledge to the Racial Justice Initiative. We will be engaging in at least something monthly, if not more, where we will also be connecting everyone who's on the call today to one another, where you will be able, with our panelists and future leaders as well, to connect with one another and build that community, that network, that village, as Khalil says all the time, to help make this stronger. We will be sending a survey as well, where you are also invited to lift up any questions you have for our panelists, as well as the Arizona Faith Network, and we will and are happy to really connect with you directly. We want to be able to help our communities throughout the state have the resources they need to address racial justice in the way that is fruitful for their community. Panelists, is there anything else you would like to say before we conclude for today?
I just wanted to comment on my story. You know, my story is playing out. You know, I'm very grateful for everybody on this call, the work that's being done to be advocates, you know, frontline advocates to bring solutions. So my biggest ask is I support this initiative to promote it statewide. Let's create a solid network in the village and move this work forward. So I think all the attendees or the panelists and the attendees.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Rabbi Bonnie. Thank you, Reverend Gerald. Thank you, Rev Joan. Thank you, Mufti Didmar. We are so grateful for you today. Joan, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, I want to say that there's no excuse any longer. There's no excuse not to educate yourself. There are books that you can read. There are audio books that you can listen to. And there are many, many films. Many of the streaming services have a category now for African-American films. And yeah, you're going to find the entertainment ones, but you're also going to find the ones that are about culture, history, and the struggle. So please avail yourself to all those things that are out there. There's no excuse anymore.
Amen. That is a strong word. We are leaving it there. Blessings to everyone. Stay tuned for upcoming conversations. Panelists, if you'll stand for just a moment, and we will say goodbye to you and hope and know that the conversations and work will continue. Blessings.